Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today, we've got an absolutely fascinating explainer lined up for you. We are looking at a story that isn't just a dry history lesson. It is a 1400-year evolutionary survival story. We're tracing the socioeconomic and political ascendancy of the Jat peasantry. Think about it. How does a historically marginalized group of semi-nomadic herders transform into modern-day political and agricultural powerhouses? It's literally an epic tale of adaptation, resilience, and structural dominance. And today, we're going to unpack exactly how it happened, step by step.
To wrap our heads around this massive history, we're going to break it down into 5 key catalyst eras: pastoral roots to peasant proprietors, religion, rebellion, and empire, colonial engineering and hegemony, modern economic and class conflict, and finally, the ultimate adaptation engine. All right, let's dive right into section 1, pastoral roots to peasant proprietors. You know, what's truly mind-blowing about this community is the sheer paradox of where they started compared to where they are today. Back in the 7th century, down in the lower Indus Valley around Sindh and Makran, the origins of the Jats, or the Zut, were defined by really harsh subsistence. Historical chronicles like the Chachnama revealed that they were egalitarian, sure, neither rich nor poor, but they were deeply marginalized. They faced severe ritual humiliation, like literally being forced to walk with a dog outdoors, and early commentators viewed them as a low Shudra people. So the big question is, how on earth did they escape this?
Well, their escape hatch was surprisingly simple. It was a single piece of technology. Between the 11th and 16th centuries, the introduction of the Persian water wheel changed absolutely everything. This device allowed them to lift water efficiently, which sparked a massive geographic migration north to cultivate the dry, barren dobes of Punjab. And for the very first time, they generated an economic surplus, transforming from nomadic herders into settled peasant proprietors. And here's the ripple effect. With surplus came military capacity. They could now afford light cavalry, they could build mud forts, and essentially they could demand an elevated social status. The Persian wheel literally turned the wheel of their destiny.
Moving right along to section 2, religion, rebellion, and empire. Okay, so once you acquire agrarian wealth, the natural next step is seeking structural power. But Orthodox society still looked down on them. So the Jats got creative and found new paths across the religious divide. Hindu Jats adopted Rajput-style titles and carved out autonomous kingdoms like Bharatpur. Muslim Jats aligned with regional Nawabs to control western Punjab. Meanwhile, in central Punjab, Sikh Jats embraced the anti-caste theology of the Sikh Panth. Guru Nanak's teachings completely rejected birth-based hierarchies, and that offered them immediate structural validation along with a really fierce martial identity. And that newfound martial identity, it launched them up a political staircase. In the 17th century, they formed grassroots rebel networks against crushing Mughal tax demands. Fast forward to the 18th century, they scaled up into the Sikh Missiles, which was this decentralized confederacy of 12 armed groups, and get this, 9 of them were led by Jat chiefs. And then, the absolute pinnacle, the Lahore Durbar under Maharaja Ranjit Singh. In literally just a few generations, they transformed from peasant tillers into a powerful aristocratic elite, holding private control over vast tracts of land. Which brings us to section 3, colonial engineering and hegemony. Now, the empire they built did eventually fall to the British, but British rule didn't destroy their agrarian power. It actually legally locked it in. In 1900, the Punjab Land Alienation Act classified the Jats as statutory agriculturalists. The idea was to protect them from urban moneylenders, but the ripple effect of this was immense. By legally barring non-agriculturalists from buying rural land, they completely excluded Dalits. This single move deep froze economic subordination, basically ensuring that those at the very bottom of the village hierarchy could never, ever buy their way out of dependency. And the British didn't just legislate, they terraformed. By building a massive irrigation network to create the canal colonies, they physically re-engineered the entire demographic landscape. We're talking about moving over 1 million people from the congested east to the newly irrigated west. Through a strict engineering filter, 78.3% of the Chenab colony alone was allotted strictly to peasant grantees. The British rewarded them for their military service, effectively cementing absolute agrarian hegemony across the entire region.
All right, fast forward to section 4, modern economy and class conflict.
So we're in the mid to late 20th century. This system is set. But wait, Technology is about to disrupt the village ecosystem all over again. In the pre-Green Revolution world, you had the Sipacy system. It was highly unequal, sure, but it was deeply interdependent and barter-based. Artisans and laborers provided manual work for a fixed share of the harvest. But the Green Revolution completely upended that. Mechanization replaced physical labor, making relationships purely cash-based, contractual, and transient. As migrant labor came in and local workers were displaced, this huge technological shift broke those old village bonds and triggered intense social friction.
And you can see that friction playing out right now over Shamalet lands, the village commons. By law, 33% of these lands are legally reserved for scheduled castes via annual lease auctions. Sounds like a fair slice of the pie, right? But here is the shocking baseline reality. Dalits make up nearly 38% of Punjab's rural population, yet they actually own less than 3.5% of the cultivable land.
So how in the world does a discrepancy like that happen? Well, there's a massive legal loophole. Wealthy landlords often field a proxy Dalit candidate, usually an attached laborer. The proxy wins the low bid, but the landlord maintains actual possession and cultivates the land. But as with every system, it faces resistance. Movements like the ZPSC, the Zameen Prapti Sangharsh Committee, are actively mobilizing Dalits to pool their funds, win these auctions collectively, grow their own fodder, and finally break that daily economic dependence on the landlords. It's a modern, day-to-day battle for structural equity.
And that leads us to our final part, Section 5, the ultimate adaptation engine.
If there's one thing we've learned so far, it's that this community doesn't just sit still when challenged. They pivot. Hard. For decades, absolute political hegemony in Punjab belonged to traditional parties like the SAD, which were deeply intertwined with the agrarian elite. But then came a dramatic drop. Support collapsed from 61% in 2007 to just 37% by 2017. Meanwhile, a totally new player, the AAP, surged to capture 30% of the vote, leading to a massive landslide realignment in 2022. The traditional voting blocs had completely fragmented.
But here is the absolute paradox of power. Even with that radical realignment and their traditional voting blocs shattering, the victorious AAP still nominated a Jat Sikh as chief minister. Why? Because the socio-political math of the region dictates that their representation isn't just about party loyalty. It remains a structural necessity in the state's political DNA. The party changed, sure, but the power center, it adapted.
Bringing this entire 1,400-year historical arc together, we can clearly see this Jat adaptation engine rests on four incredibly strong pillars. They leverage geographic mobility to move from arid lands to fertile doabs, economic mobility to evolve from herders to commercial Green Revolution farmers, social mobility to bypass old caste hierarchies using theology and colonial armies, and finally, political mobility to scale from localized rebels to mastering modern democratic electoral math. They don't just hold on to dominance, they continuously re-engineer it. However, no engine runs perfectly forever, right? Today, they're facing a severe, frankly existential threat, a demographic squeeze. The Green Revolution model has stagnated, with depleted groundwater and massive debt crushing farmers. At the exact same time, the state's total fertility rate has collapsed to a record low of 1.4. Compounding all of this is a massive wave of youth emigration to Western countries. This is creating a demographic vacuum in the countryside, fundamentally threatening to alter local land ownership balances for the very first time in centuries.
Which leaves us with this final, really profound question. With a record low birth rate and mass youth emigration literally hollowing out their traditional base, how will this 1,400-year-old adaptation engine re-engineer itself to survive the ultimate demographic squeeze? Can a community that has historically adapted to hostile kings, religious shifts, and massive colonial empires adapt to a future where their own youth are simply leaving? It's a fascinating challenge, and the answer is going to shape the entire future of the region. Thanks for learning with us today on This Explainer. I really hope this structural breakdown helped you see history in a whole new light. Until next time, stay curious.